So my daughter asked me, Daddy, can you make me a bedside table? I'm just looking for a basic rectangular design, she said. I'd like a little molding on top to trim it up. I would like a drawer on the top, and I want a cubby hole below for storage. Maybe put some trim on the bottom. I like those feet that are kind of fancy. She didn't know they were called onion feet, but that's what they are. And then she sent me a picture and said something like this, but I really would like it dark, a really dark stain, and ebony. And oh, by the way, Daddy, can you make me two? So how do you say no? So the basic dimensions of this guy are going to wind up being about 20 inches across, 16 inches deep, and the overall height will be 24 inches when you add those amazing onion feet. So this is going to be a basic 4-panel box, and I'm not skilled enough to get really fancy on the joinery for my plywood panels, and I'll explain more about how I strengthened up the cabinet as we go along. So I went, just like you can go, to your basic neighborhood construction store or big box home center, and they'll sell this cabinet grade plywood, and you can get it in usually birch. Sometimes you can find maple. In this particular case, I'm using oak, because if I'm going to use an ebony stain, I'm looking for a little texture too, which I will get with the oak. So also, because I don't have a pickup truck, I wound up buying these panels from the store in 2 by 4 foot pieces, and they had a clean edge on one side, but that's what I'm doing here, is essentially on the opposite side of the clean edge, I'm cutting just a straight, clean edge that I can work with on my box. And so this is oak on 2 sides, which is a little bit more expensive, so you want to make sure you measure right before you cut. These panels are relatively expensive when you buy them. So once I get the basic dimensions ripped, and all of these cuts right now are along the grain, but they'll cut to size. And so I'll be ready to actually use these now to help build the sides of my cabinet. And then one trick I learned from another friend of mine is, if you're going to cross cut against the grain, you can either use a sacrificial piece of wood that sits underneath this so that you don't get tear out, or in this particular case, because I had a brand new trim blade on my saw, 60 tooth blade, painter's tape actually works really well to hold that together so you don't get the tear out. So another trick that I like to use when I'm putting panels together like this is I use these frame making 90-degree clamps, and that way I can adjust things a little bit and get the corners straight and true. But what's about to happen next, I think, will drive a lot of woodworkers crazy. So my apologies, because I wasn't necessarily looking to cut these corners on 45s. In fact, I wanted the full dimension of the panel to run across the box because of the weight that would sit on the bottom of this particular side table. And chances are somebody's going to sit on it. So a 45-degree angle glued and nailed in on those corners just isn't going to cut it. So what I've done is I'm going to screw in that full dimension of the base right into the sides of the table here. Now these will be on the bottom, and ultimately you won't see them. I'm also going to have those onion feet on the bottom as well. So all I'm really doing at this point is building a basic box, and I'm making sure, and I thankfully my table saw cuts fantastically straight cuts, and everything fits together really well. Consistent cuts, always seems to make things go better when you put this cabinet together. So this will wind up being the top, and I'm just putting in just some temporary, well, they're permanent, but just some pin nails to hold it in place. And we're going to stiffen up the whole cabinet on the front and the back with these solid oak panels that we'll be building next. So there's the basic structure, straight and square. So I took a break from cutting panels and I wanted to get set up for how I would attach the feet to the bottom of the cabinet. Now I'm using a trick that I showed in a previous video. It's not a trick, it's just a way to mount these types of furniture feet that have a bolt embedded in the actual foot. So I'm going to put in T-nuts in just a 3/4 inch piece of solid oak. I want to sit the T-nut down in the wood so that ultimately it's flush with the wood so that I can mount each particular rectangular base to the cabinet directly and have it hold and have it be flat. So once I've got the T-nut larger hole, this is a 1-inch hole carved out to hold the T-nut, I'll drill all the way through for the T-nut to fit all the way in. And that's how it would nail in. So now that I had them all cut up, all that I'm really doing at this point is taking the T-nut, and it's got nail brads built into that T-nut so that when you nail it in there, it's not coming out. And I'll show you that when you thread in then the foot, it'll go in that way, and then the bottom mounts flush up against the cabinet. Now I actually have to replace these bolts because they're too long. And let's talk about the onion feet for a second. So I have a wood lathe, and it would have been great to kind of make these myself, but I found a really good price on these. They were hardwood. They came pre-stained, so I had to sand them down and I'll restain them. But this is the assembly for that particular set of feet. I think in some cases when you're a woodworker, you're going to look to take advantage of pieces and parts that are pre-manufactured to save you some time. And that's what I did for those onion feet. There's no way that I could have made 8 of them that would have been an exact match. I mean, I'd like to think I'm that good, but my skills are growing over time. It was just better for me to buy them, get them cleaned up, and get them stained. So now I'm actually cutting the solid oak pieces that I'll need to make my faceplate and the rear plate for my cabinet. Once I had the length cut down, I'm going to rip down these particular pieces to 1.5 inches wide, and that will wind up being the predominant construction dimension for this particular faceplate. And before I bought the wood, just like you will at the store, I'll stick every one of these on a flat surface to make sure that they're, that they're not warped, that they're not cupped, and that they're nice and straight. So now I've got my 1.5 inch pieces, and this is the basic layout of the faceplate. So I'm going to wind up connecting these pieces with pins and pins or dowels. And I've got a piece of hardware that you can see. It looks like a little rectangular piece of aluminum that I've shown in other videos that helps me center the drill holes that I need to make in these pieces of oak to glue in and hammer in those dowels. It's a great way for adding a ton of strength when you're just looking at butt joints for these particular pieces on the faceplate. And so essentially that's what I did, and there's my dowels. And once I get set up with the right drill bit, and I've lined up all my holes, I will drill them so that I can get them all assembled. And here is a shot of all of the holes are drilled. And another shop tip, I wound up buying a bunch of wooden chopsticks. A, I must have been hungry, and B, they wind up making great little, when you break them apart into two, they're inexpensive, you just throw it away, but it's great for getting glue into these holes. In fact, I use these for biscuit joinery also. But you can take a nice little dab of glue, get it in the hole, get it spread around, and then you're all set to get your dowels hammered in. I'm only going to show sort of the assembly of one of these panels, but I had to do this to 4. And these are the fronts that I'm creating now. But there's a back plate that's also done in solid oak that is going to be wider. In other words, it'll be the back side of the drawer. So I wound up gluing multiple pieces of oak together to give me that coverage that you don't see the back of the drawer. You'll see a picture of that a little bit later. These actually went together really well. Now I'll check them with the square before I clamp them together, but when you pulled it all together with the clamp, it squared them up really nice. And I've done this kind of work before on other projects where I've used the pins and glued joints like this, and you almost have to break the wood before you'll break this joint. And it makes a nice flush attachment for this frame. So here's the faceplate, and I talked about gluing up additional pieces of oak for the back panel. So these are the backs, and that'll actually hide the drawer from the back side of the cabinet. All solid oak. And another one of my favorite things to keep in the shop is one of these white gum erasers. So I got pencil marks all over this thing. The pink eraser sometimes leaves a little bit of a residue, a darker residue in a wood grain, especially like oak. And I find these white gum erasers are fantastic for taking off pencil marks. So keep those in your shop. So here's the bottom. And I've got a stack of my cleats ready for the onion feet, a little bit over to the right there. But that's how the faceplate looks on the cabinet. It came out great. So I'm going to glue this to the front of the cabinet, and I'm just going to hold it in place with some pin nails, because later on, and I don't think I'm going to show this until the second part of this video, I'm going to stiffen everything up with additional dowels. So I've got some oak dowels that I'm going to drive in and strengthen up that faceplate and its attachment to the box. But we'll save that in the second part of this video. So I was worried actually about having to sand these down or trim them up. Sometimes when you make a frame like this, it doesn't exactly match the dimensions of the box, but it came out really great. It was very, very true to the dimensions of the plywood box that I made. So I didn't actually have to do a lot of sanding and cleanup to that frame. So I'm only going to show the sort of the manufacturing of this one piece, but keep in mind I'm doing all of this twice because I love my daughter. So I'm not even sure that I needed a lot of clamps on this. It came together really clean. There weren't any gaps between the frame and the box. And in this particular shot, I've attached feet to this particular cabinet, but I'll show you in a couple more minutes of how that came together. And here's the inside. Now, I'm not going to attach the back yet because I'll show you what it looks like. That'll be the back of each cabinet, of each table. But I wanted to install all the drawer hardware, and it's a little easier to work inside the cabinet like this with the back off. So you can't just put the drawer hardware straight up because I've got 3/4 inch plywood, and then I cut my faceplate at 1.5 inches. So in order to get things set up to be flush for those drawer slides, I needed to add another 3/4 inch of dimension to the inside of the cabinet. So I had that extra plywood, which were cut into strips. And these will wind up fitting inside the cabinet so that I can attach my drawer slides to. Now, all that I'm really doing is setting up some screw holes, and then I'll glue this to the inside of the cabinet. In fact, I like creating templates so that I only have to measure things out once. So that's kind of what I'm doing with this guy. I'm actually not sure why I was getting so precise on my screw holes. You're never going to see it, but that's okay. So get my countersink drill bit set up, and we'll start my template. And there we go. And then we'll just use that to just set up the first 4 pilot holes, and then I'll countersink the holes on each piece after I'm done. So back to the face. It's a very basic design, but I like the way it looks. Now I pre-cut a little piece of plywood to see how that would fit into the front, and my goal is to get that drawer front flat to the rest of the cabinet. So the way that I have to set up these drawer slides is that I need them to be completely aligned with the front of the face of this particular cabinet. And so accommodating the 3/4 inch width of the actual drawer front, the oak drawer front, the drawer slides have to stop 3/4 inch back from that. So my drawer should be set, when I manufacture the drawer, it should sit 3/4 inches in on the cabinet so that when I attach my oak faceplate for the drawer, it's all flush. So that's how I've set up the design. And a tip that I talked about in a different video are these tongue depressors. I love them for spreading glue. You buy them in bulk. You throw them away when you're done. They're great. And they're great for spreading out glue quickly. So these are all nice and square now, and all set up for me to put in the inside drawer slide. I don't have to worry about the piece that attaches to the drawer yet. And then I thought I wanted to shoot a little bit about attaching the feet. So these are the cleats that'll go on the bottom of the cabinet. And facing the front or the back, I wanted the cleats to be inside about 3/4 inch. So I used the faceplate as my guideline, and that cleat sits in just on the edge of that faceplate, which is 3/4 inch in. And on the sides, I wanted them just outside of the screws that, not that I'm ever going to take it apart, but just outside of the screw hole and the screw on the side of the cabinet. And I have to tell you, I think on a couple of occasions for both of these cabinets, I almost nailed these in the wrong way. But here we go. So we're all set up. This sacrificial piece of plywood that's on the inside makes up that gap. And I'm just marking out my holes in the drawer slide. I'm getting them both set up exactly the same way. They'll carry the load close to the bottom of the drawer. And I'm not drilling too deep on these holes because these screws are very small. I just wanted them lined up so that I could put it on there and pop a screw in there and not have to worry about holding it too much in place. Rock and roll. These are pretty inexpensive drawer slides as well. And they're the type that as you roll them back into place, the drawer slide, I don't know if you can see it, it angles down a little bit. So in other words, when the drawer reaches its closed position, it kind of drops down. Gravity kind of pulls the drawer down by about 1/8 of an inch, and that holds it closed. So pretty inexpensive, but pretty easy to work with. And that is the end of part 1 of this video. Thanks for watching.